Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be looking at an inspiring story of resistance that might surprise you.
Hmm.
It's the Białystok Ghetto Uprising.
Yeah.
You've probably heard of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising,
Yeah.
but this one,
Mhm.
while smaller in scale,
Yeah.
I think has equally powerful lessons to teach us about, the human spirit.
Mhm.
We're going to go beyond the basic timeline today.
Okay.
And I really want to understand the spirit of these fighters,
Yeah.
how they used what little they had,
Right.
and what their actions meant for the world. Buckle up, because this one gets pretty intense.
What's really remarkable about this uprising is that it took place in one of the most horrific environments imaginable.
Yeah, paint that picture for us.
Right.
What was life actually like in the Białystok Ghetto?
Well, imagine 40,000 people crammed into a tiny area, struggling for basic necessities like food and water.
Wow.
Hunger was a constant companion, disease ran rampant,
Right.
and the fear of deportation was just a heavy weight on everyone's shoulders. It was an existence defined by deprivation and terror.
And that terror turned into a horrifying reality in February of 1943 when the Nazis began deportations to Treblinka. Thousands were ripped from their homes and sent to this extermination camp.
Right.
I can only imagine that this must have been a breaking point for those left behind.
It was a stark wake-up call, a moment where the illusion of safety was shattered. For many, the brutality of the deportations ignited a fierce determination to resist. They knew they couldn't just stand by and wait for their turn.
Right.
They had to fight back.
And that's where we see the emergence of the Jewish Combat Organization, or OB,
Yes.
led by Mordechai Tenenbaum and Daniel Moszkowicz.
Yes.
What I find fascinating here is they were fully aware of the odds stacked against them.
Absolutely.
They knew they were facing a vastly superior enemy, so what drove them to resist?
They were driven by a profound sense of defiance, a refusal to be dehumanized. They understood that even if they couldn't achieve a military victory,
Right.
their resistance would be a powerful symbol. It would demonstrate to the world that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the human spirit could not be broken.
So they were essentially choosing a symbolic fight, knowing they couldn't win militarily.
In a way, yes.
That's incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
But knowing they were going up against the full force of the Nazi military, how did they even begin to plan for an uprising? What were their strategies?
Well, Tenenbaum brought invaluable experience from the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising.
Okay.
He knew the importance of using the urban environment to their advantage,
Right.
turning the narrow streets and buildings into a battleground.
Mm-hmm.
He also understood the psychological impact of resistance, how even small acts of defiance could disrupt the enemy's operations and boost morale among the fighters.
Okay, so they knew they had to be strategic, using the urban environment to their advantage.
Yeah.
Can you give us some specific examples? What did that look like in practice?
They created a network of tunnels and bunkers to move undetected and store weapons. They also planned to use rooftops for sniper attacks and to barricade streets to slow down the advance of Nazi troops.
Wow.
Their goal was to make every inch of the ghetto a point of resistance.
I get chills just thinking about that. Facing tanks with homemade bombs, that's incredible bravery.
It is.
So the stage is set, the plans are made. Then comes August 16th, 1943, the day the Nazis launched their final liquidation of the ghetto.
Yes.
This is when the uprising explodes.
Indeed. The fighters, armed with a meager collection of pistols, rifles, grenades, and even homemade explosives, emerged from their hiding places and launched their attack.
Wow.
It was a chaotic scene, with gunfire erupting throughout the ghetto. The resistance fighters, though vastly outnumbered and outgunned, fought with incredible ferocity.
Knowing they were facing such overwhelming firepower, was there any hope for a successful outcome? What
Well,
were their goals beyond simply fighting back?
while a military victory was highly unlikely, their goals were multifaceted. They wanted to inflict casualties on the enemy,
Okay.
disrupt the deportation process, and buy time for others to escape. But perhaps, most importantly, they wanted to die on their own terms, fighting for their dignity and freedom rather than submitting to Nazi brutality.
And at the forefront of this fight was Mordechai Tenenbaum, a man who had already seen the horrors of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising.
Right.
He knew what they were up against,
He did.
and his leadership was crucial in those first hours and days.
It was.
He rallied the fighters, instilled a sense of purpose, and coordinated their attacks. He understood that every moment of resistance was a victory in itself.
Absolutely.
And tragically, his story ends in defiance as well. He chose to take his own life rather than be captured by the Nazis.
a testament to his unwavering spirit.
Oh,
Even in death, he refused to give the Nazis a victory.
what a powerful statement.
Eh,
And alongside him was Daniel Moszkowicz, the strategist, who focused on planning and execution. It seems like keeping morale up in a situation like this would be almost impossible.
Yeah, you're right. Psychological pressure must have been immense. But Moszkowicz was adept at maintaining morale. Even amidst the chaos and violence, he understood that unity and a shared sense of purpose were essential to their survival. He kept the fighters focused on their goals, reminding them that every act of resistance mattered.
And it wasn't just the men fighting. The women of the ghetto were deeply involved in the resistance. This wasn't just a few brave souls, but a community standing together.
Absolutely. The women of the Białystok Ghetto were incredible. They took on many roles. Couriers relaying vital information between different resistance groups, nurses tending to the wounded in secret makeshift hospitals, even fighters themselves taking up arms alongside the men.
It's amazing to think about these women risking their lives to deliver messages, to care for the injured, to actually fight. Do we know any specifics about how they contributed to the uprising?
One powerful example is the story of Temeshnozderman. She was a young woman who served as a courier smuggling weapons and information through the ghetto. She was eventually captured and tortured by the Nazis, but she refused to betray her comrades. Her bravery and sacrifice became a symbol of the strength and resilience of the women in the resistance.
Hearing her story and knowing how this all ends is incredibly heartbreaking. We have to acknowledge that despite their courage, the fighters were facing a brutal, technologically superior enemy.
That's the tragic reality. The Germans had tanks, artillery, and an overwhelming number of troops. The resistance fighters, with their limited weapons and resources, were simply outmatched.
So by August 20th, just a few days after it began, the uprising was effectively crushed. The Nazis resumed the deportations, sending the remaining ghetto inhabitants to Treblinka. It's a devastating outcome.
It is. But we have to remember that even though the uprising was militarily defeated, it had a profound impact. It shattered the myth of Nazi invincibility, showing the world that even the most marginalized and oppressed people could rise up and fight back.
So their defeat, in a way, became a victory.
Exactly. It became a symbol of defiance, of courage, and of the enduring human spirit. Think about it. These individuals facing unimaginable hardship chose to fight back knowing the odds were stacked against them. That act of defiance, that refusal to be passive victims, sends a powerful message that resonates even today.
Their story really forces us to think about what courage and resilience mean in the face of truly impossible odds. And it makes me wonder, are there any parallels we can draw between their resourcefulness and modern-day resistance movements? Because they were using anything they could, homemade bombs, urban warfare tactics, to fight back.
That's a great point. Their use of whatever resources they could find echoes the tactics of many modern-day resistance movements around the world. Think about groups facing oppressive regimes or fighting for their rights. They often lack access to traditional weapons and have to rely on their ingenuity and courage to resist. The Białystok Ghetto Uprising reminds us that resistance can take many forms, and that even the most desperate of circumstances can spark incredible acts of courage and ingenuity.
It's a reminder that the human spirit is incredibly powerful. But knowing that so many of the fighters and the people in the ghetto perished, how do we reconcile their bravery with the tragedy of the Holocaust?
That's a difficult question, and one that historians and scholars continue to grapple with. I think it's important to acknowledge both the heroism of the resistance and the immense tragedy of the Holocaust. We must remember that the uprising was a response to unimaginable cruelty and violence. It's a testament to the strength and resilience of the human spirit, but it also serves as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of hatred and intolerance. We must honor the memory of those who perished by learning from the past and working to prevent such atrocities from happening again.
So while we recognize the devastating loss of life, we also have to understand that the spirit of the Białystok Ghetto Uprising goes beyond the outcome of the battle itself.
Absolutely. Their story transcends the specific historical context and speaks to something universal, the human capacity for resistance, for courage, and for hope, even in the face of overwhelming darkness.
It really makes you think, doesn't it?
Hmm.
Like, what would we do in that situation? How can we even begin to fathom that level of courage and resilience?
Yeah, it's a question I think we all have to ask ourselves.
Hmm.
It's easy to feel powerless when we see injustice in the world today.
Right.
We think, what can I do? I'm just one person.
Right.
But the story of the Białystok Ghetto Uprising challenges that notion.
Yeah.
It shows that even small acts of resistance can have a ripple effect, can inspire others, and can contribute to a larger movement for change.
So how do we take that inspiration and apply it to our own lives? What are some tangible things we can do to make a difference to honor their memory?
Well, I think it starts with awareness. We have to educate ourselves about the past, about the dangers of intolerance and discrimination. The more we understand history, the better equipped we are to recognize and challenge injustice in our own time.
Learning about history isn't just about memorizing facts and dates. It's about understanding the human stories, the motivations, the struggles, and the triumphs, and then connecting those stories to the world we live in today.
Exactly. And then it's about action. Speaking out against injustice, supporting organizations that fight for human rights, even simply having difficult conversations with friends and family members who might hold prejudiced views. These actions might seem small, but they are crucial in creating a more just and equitable world.
Yeah, their fight might have been about physical survival, but I think for us today, it's about a different kind of survival. The survival of empathy, of compassion, of the belief that every human life has value.
I think that's a beautiful way to put it. The Białystok Ghetto Uprising was a fight for survival on every level, physical, spiritual, and moral. And in a way, their fight continues through us. By remembering their story, by honoring their sacrifice, and by carrying their spirit of resistance forward, we help ensure that their fight was not in vain.
It's a heavy but incredibly important lesson. And I have to say, I'm so grateful to have had you here to guide us through this deep dive. This hasn't just been a history lesson, it's been a call to action.
I agree. The Białystok Ghetto Uprising is a story that stays with you. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit can endure, that hope can flicker, even in the face of overwhelming despair.
And for anyone listening, if this story has resonated with you, if it's sparked a fire in your heart, I encourage you to continue learning. Read the accounts of survivors, explore the historical archives, and engage in conversations about the importance of resistance and the fight for human dignity.
Because every time we tell these stories, every time we remember, we keep their memory alive. And we remind ourselves that the fight for justice and equality is a fight that must continue. It's a fight we can't afford to lose.
That's a powerful message to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive